My name is Rachel Dawson, and I never thought my own sister would become the person I feared most in the world. I grew up believing that family was supposed to be the safest place you could ever know, but that belief was smashed as completely as the insulin vials she hurled against the kitchen floor. The sound of glass shattering is burned into my memory. The liquid splattered across the tiles, shining under the kitchen light like wasted hope. I stood frozen, my chest tight, my throat dry, every nerve in my body screaming that this was more than just cruelty. This was survival. Vanessa Dawson. My older sister was standing just a few feet away. She was 33, tall, strikingly beautiful, the kind of woman people often praised for her looks before they ever noticed her eyes. Those eyes had grown darker through the years, but in that moment they were almost inhuman, filled with a twisted kind of delight. She leaned toward me slowly as if savoring my panic and whispered the words that will never leave me. Die. Slowly. I want to watch. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My lungs felt hollow. I reached instinctively toward the counter, desperate to grab anything that might have been left, but she was faster. Her hand tightened around the small box where I kept my last reserve, a box I had checked twice before going to bed the night before. Now it was in her possession. She tilted it slightly, letting the vials inside clink against each other like wind chimes of doom. "You really thought you could hide them from me, Rachel," she said. "I know all your spots. Every drawer, every bag, even under the loose floorboard by your bed. I found it all." Her words twisted inside my stomach. I had always known Vanessa was thorough, but I had never imagined she would go this far. Without insulin, my body would turn on itself. Within hours, my blood sugar would climb so high that acid would build in my blood, my organs would strain, my heart might even stop. This was not a game. This was life and death. I could already feel the early signs. My throat was painfully dry, as though I had swallowed sand. My hands trembled not from low blood sugar this time, but from adrenaline mixed with the creeping rise of glucose. My vision blurred slightly at the edges. I knew my body too well. I knew the countdown had begun. Vanessa stepped closer, holding one vial between her fingers. She raised it in front of my face and then let it drop. The tiny container struck the tile and exploded, the precious liquid scattering like raindrops that would never fall again. "That was for stealing my spotlight all these years," she said quietly. "You always had them running after you, checking on you, feeding you special meals, buying you expensive medicine. And me, Rachel, I had nothing. Nobody cared." Her bitterness was older than I could remember, but bitterness had never been this dangerous before. I opened my mouth, my voice rasping. "Vanessa, please, this is not about you. This is my life." She laughed, then a sharp sound that echoed off the walls. "Exactly," she said. "Your life. And I am finally in control of it." The nausea was starting. My stomach churned, the first sign that my body was sliding toward ketoacidosis. I knew the stages. First thirst and fatigue, then nausea and vomiting, then confusion, eventually coma. I had been close before years ago when I was younger and missed a dose, but this time was different. This time it was deliberate. I wanted to run, to push her aside, to grab the phone and dial for help, but my legs already felt heavy. She saw it too. "You are weakening," she said almost cheerfully. "Soon you will not even be able to stand. That is when it will get interesting." I stared at her, searching for the sister I used to know, the one who braided my hair before school or shared popcorn with me during movies. But she was gone. What stood before me was a woman consumed by jealousy and rage, someone who had let resentment turn into something unrecognizable. My heart pounded as I considered my options. The landline was in the living room. My cell phone was upstairs charging. Between me and both exits stood Vanessa, clutching my survival in her hand. I could see the outline of the disposal switch on the counter behind her. If she wanted to, she could destroy everything in seconds. "Rachel, you always thought you were special," she sneered. "But what happens when the special one loses her crutch? What happens when you cannot count carbs or measure doses? Who will you be then?" "Nothing," Just another broken girl gasping on the floor. The words sliced deeper than I expected. I pressed my palms against the counter for balance, forcing myself to breathe. My skin felt hot and dry. Each breath was shorter than the last. I needed water, but more than that, I needed insulin. "Please," I whispered again, though my throat felt raw. "You do not understand what you are doing." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said. "I want to see what it looks like when the perfect patient crumbles. I want to see if you beg." Her smile widened as my knees buckled slightly. The room spun. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. "How high do you think it is now, Eichel 405? Did you know organs start to shut down after a while? I read about it. Imagine that. Your own body eating itself." Her knowledge horrified me. She had studied this. She had prepared for this. This was not a sudden outburst of anger. This was premeditated cruelty. I closed my eyes just for a moment and saw flashes of my future. A hospital bed, tubes, maybe not waking up. The image of my parents standing over me crying. The image of Vanessa smiling at my funeral. No, I could not let it happen. I forced my eyes open, meeting hers with every ounce of strength I had left. "Vanessa, this is not going to end the way you think." She tilted her head, almost amused. "You are right," she whispered. "It will end with you gone and me finally free." Her hand hovered over the disposal switch again, the last vials trembling above the metal opening. The sound of the previous vial shattering echoed in my mind, a cruel reminder of how fragile my safety was. And yet, even as despair closed in, another thought sparked inside me. This was not the end. Not yet. Somehow I would survive this. Somehow I would live to tell the story. 9 days later, I was in a courtroom. My sister, the same woman who had smiled as she threatened to let me die, was now sitting behind the defense table. Her face was streaked with tears, her hands trembling as the judge read out the charges: reckless endangerment, attempted murder, destruction of life-saving medication. The courtroom was silent except for her sobs. As I watched her cry, I remembered the calmness in her voice that night. "Die slowly. I want to watch." She had said it as if it were a promise, and now it was her turn to face the consequences. I was born into a house that always felt divided, even though no one admitted it out loud. My parents loved both of us, or at least that was what they told themselves, but the truth is that my diagnosis of type 1 diabetes when I was a toddler created an invisible line between my sister Vanessa and me. From the very beginning, I became the fragile one, the sick child who needed attention, while she was the strong and healthy one who was expected to understand. I remember the smell of disinfectant from the pediatric clinic, the endless finger pricks, the way my mother carried juice boxes in her purse like they were treasure. Those details shaped my childhood, but they also shaped Vanessa's in a darker way. She was 5 years older and old enough to notice how much energy was poured into me. When I was 4 and she was 9, she watched my parents hover over me with my first glucose meter, praising me for being brave while she sat ignored at the table with her math homework. It planted a seed of bitterness that would only grow. I think the first time I realized something was wrong was the day she hid my special snacks. I had been told to keep them near me for Lowe's granola bars and juice that were practically medicine. I went looking and found nothing. When I asked her if she had seen them, she smirked and shrugged her lips, curling like she enjoyed the panic in my face. Hours later, when my blood sugar dropped and my mother frantically searched for those missing snacks, Vanessa stepped forward with the box, pretending she had just found it under the couch. My mother thanked her for being helpful. I was too young to call it jealousy, but I felt the sting of unfairness. By the time I was 6 and Vanessa 11, she had started a habit of telling relatives that I exaggerated my symptoms. She would say things like, "Rachel always pretends she is dizzy so she can get candy," or "She fakes feeling sick so mom will hug her." The adults would laugh awkwardly and then reassure her that she was loved too. They never realized that her words carved deep into my sense of self. I began to question myself. Was I making too big a deal of my illness? Was I a burden that guilt stayed with me like a shadow? My parents' response was always the same. "Be patient, Rachel. She is jealous. She will grow out of it." But she never did. Instead, the jealousy hardened like cement. When I was 7, I overheard her whisper to a neighbor girl that she wished I would just disappear so our parents would stop worrying about me all the time. That moment sliced into me sharper than any needle. I wanted to tell my mom, but when I tried, she brushed it off, saying Vanessa did not mean it, that sisters said cruel things sometimes. I learned to swallow my pain. Every holiday and birthday carried its own small cruelty. One Christmas, I received a new insulated case for my supplies, something my parents thought would make me feel special. Vanessa sulked the entire day, claiming no one cared about her. On my 8th birthday, she deliberately blew out my candles before I could laughing when I burst into tears. I kept telling myself that if I was kinder, quieter, more understanding, she might eventually soften. But she only seemed to grow more bitter. Looking back, I can see how those early experiences trained me to doubt myself. I believed my sister's narrative that I was somehow stealing attention, that I was guilty for being sick. My parents reinforced it without meaning to, always telling me to ignore her jealousy instead of addressing it directly. It was gaslighting wrapped in good intentions. They made me think I was wrong to feel hurt, that I should endure her cruelty because she was struggling. That mixture of guilt and confusion followed me into every corner of my life. I remember one night clearly when I was 9. I woke to find Vanessa standing at my bedroom door just watching me. The moonlight lit her face in a way that made her look like a stranger. When I asked what she was doing, she said I was noisy in my sleep and she wanted to see if I would choke. She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather, then walked away. I lay awake the rest of the night, shivering, afraid to close my eyes again. That was when I first realized that my sister's jealousy was not just sibling rivalry. It was something darker, something dangerous. Still, whenever I told my parents, they dismissed it. "She is just jealous. She loves you deep down. Endure it for now." That phrase, "endure it for now," became my silent mantra. I endured when she hid my supplies. I endured when she mocked me in front of classmates, saying I carried juice like a baby. I endured when she called me defective under her breath. I endured because I believed that was what good sisters did. I thought love meant forgiveness without end. By the time I turned 10, the pattern was unshakable. She would lash out. I would endure. My parents would excuse her. That cycle laid the foundation for everything that came later. In those years, I developed 2 contradictory feelings toward Vanessa. On some days, I wanted desperately to win her love, to show her that I did not want to take anything away from her. On other days, I hated her with a passion that scared me. That conflict became the emotional rhythm of my childhood, a rhythm that swung between guilt and resentment, longing and fear. Even now, when I think back to those nights of whispered insults and stolen snacks, I feel the echo of that old confusion. Why was I the one who felt guilty when she was the one who tormented me? Why did I believe it was my responsibility to make peace while she sharpened her cruelty? These questions never left me, and they explain why later, when the true violence came, I still froze instead of fighting back immediately. I had been conditioned since childhood to doubt my own suffering, to carry the weight of her jealousy like it was my fault. That was the toxic root of our story. It all began in that house where my illness drew attention, where her bitterness grew unchecked, and where silence was mistaken for peace. That silence would cost me nearly everything years later, when Vanessa's resentment turned from words and tricks into something far more lethal. By the time I entered my teenage years, I had already grown accustomed to the rhythm of fear and guilt that defined my relationship with Vanessa. She was 5 years older already in high school when I started middle school, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she deserved the spotlight no matter the cost. She had discovered a new way to turn her jealousy into power. Instead of only mocking me or hiding my supplies, she began mimicking my symptoms with frightening accuracy. The first time it happened was at a small family barbecue. I had felt a low coming on and excused myself to test my blood sugar. When I came back with juice in my hand, Vanessa suddenly clutched her stomach, her hands trembling as she slurred her words. Everyone rushed to her side. I stood there stunned, watching my own condition played out as theater. When my uncle asked if she was okay, she murmured that she felt weak and might faint. My parents panicked, convinced she was experiencing something serious. I tried to tell them her blood sugar was normal, but they hushed me. She soaked in their concern like sunlight. Later, when she was alone with me, she smirked and whispered, "Did I get it right? The way your hands shake. You should have seen your face." That moment taught me that she had been studying me, memorizing the little details of my illness like an actress preparing for a role. From then on, the performances multiplied. At school events during holiday dinners, even once at the grocery store when I actually was having a low, she collapsed dramatically near the frozen food aisle while I struggled to stay upright. The attention swung to her, instantly leaving me to fend for myself. When the paramedics arrived, they checked her first. She was perfectly fine, of course, but she claimed their meter was broken. I wanted to scream, but my voice always felt drowned out. The worst part was that she started joining online support groups pretending to be a diabetic. I caught her on my computer once reading about the exact progression of hypoglycemia and ketoacidosis. She scribbled notes in a journal, practicing tremors in front of a mirror. She studied the way my speech slurred when my blood sugar dropped too quickly. It was chilling. At first, I thought maybe she was just curious. Maybe she wanted to understand what I was going through. But the more she performed in front of others, the more I realized she wanted my condition for herself. She wanted the sympathy, the attention, the power. One of the most humiliating moments came during my 15th birthday party. Vanessa waited until the cake was set down in front of me. I had been careful with my insulin all day, monitoring closely so I could enjoy a slice. Just as everyone began singing, she fell to the floor, convulsing. My friends screamed. My parents dropped everything to tend to her. The candles burned out while I stood frozen, my heart racing, my glucose meter clutched in my hand. They called an ambulance. At the hospital, tests showed she was perfectly fine. She shrugged it off, claiming the symptoms had passed before they drew blood. I sat in silence, the party forgotten, wondering why my life felt like a stage where she was the lead actress and I was just the backdrop. Over time, her lies became sharper. She told classmates that I faked my lows to skip gym class, that I exaggerated symptoms to get candy from teachers. Rumors spread. Some of my peers began to whisper that I was just attention-seeking. I started to feel isolated, ashamed of an illness I never chose. Vanessa fueled those whispers with practiced sighs and rolling eyes whenever I pulled out my meter. My parents tried to comfort me, but even they began to hesitate. Sometimes I caught my mother's uncertain glance when Vanessa insisted I was dramatizing. That look cut deeper than any insult. It was the look of doubt. I had always assumed at least my parents believed me, but Vanessa was eroding even that foundation. By 17, I was exhausted. Managing diabetes was already a full-time job, and managing the constant assault of my sister's lies felt unbearable. I kept journals of my blood sugar, photographs of test results, anything to prove I was not exaggerating, but no amount of evidence could fight the grip Vanessa had on people's perception. She was charming, magnetic, and relentless. I can still recall one night when she cornered me in the kitchen. She leaned in close, her breath hot against my ear, and whispered, "One day they will believe me, and not you. They will think you are the liar." The certainty in her voice chilled me. It was not just a threat, it was a promise. My teenage years became a maze of self-doubt. I swung between moments of quiet resilience and crushing despair. I would resolve to ignore her, to focus on my studies, to build a life where her voice could not reach me. But then she would stage another episode or whisper another cruel accusation, and I would crumble. My body was already fragile from the relentless demands of my illness, but my spirit was even more fragile from the weight of her malice. Looking back, I see now that Vanessa's escalation was a rehearsal for the horrors to come. Every fake collapse, every stolen snack, every whispered insult was a step toward the day she would no longer be satisfied with lies. She was preparing herself, learning the science of my disease, learning how to weaponize it. She was building up to the moment when she would no longer just mimic my suffering but orchestrate it. And all the while I was trapped in silence, carrying guilt that did not belong to me, too afraid and too conditioned to believe I deserved to fight back. Those teenage years were the crucible that forged the twisted dynamic between us. She grew bolder. I grew weaker. The pattern was set. What I did not know was that the true violence was waiting patient and cold for the right moment to strike. College was supposed to be my escape. At 18, I packed my bags with trembling hands, insulin carefully stored in cool packs, and boarded a bus to a university 2 hours away. I chose nursing as my major because I thought if I could take care of others, maybe I could finally feel like my disease was a strength instead of a weakness. I remember stepping into the dorms for the first time, breathing in the scent of new paint, and possibility believing that distance would mean freedom. But freedom was short-lived because Vanessa was still tethered to me like a shadow that refused to die. She stayed in our hometown, drifting from one job to another, quitting when it became inconvenient, always telling our parents that she was not feeling well enough to work. She had perfected her story of mysterious illnesses, borrowing details from my own medical life to excuse her failures. Whenever I called home to check in, my mother's voice would tighten with worry about Vanessa. She says she feels faint after meals. She thinks she might have low blood sugar like you. I would grip the phone, my chest burning, because I knew exactly what Vanessa was doing. She was extending her performance beyond the family into the wider world. When I came home for breaks, I noticed the way she had transformed the house into her stage. Juice boxes in the fridge labeled with her name, glucose meters scattered around as if she used them daily, even appointment cards with doctors she never actually visited. My parents seemed caught between suspicion and denial. They wanted to believe her, perhaps because admitting otherwise meant confronting the cruelty that had festered for years. I tried to ignore it to focus on exams, clinical rotations, and the friends I made in the dorms. But the shadow always followed. The cruelest moment of those years came during my sophomore year. I had a severe low during an evening class and ended up in the campus hospital overnight. When I finally opened my eyes and saw the IV in my arm, the first thing I felt was exhaustion. The second was shame. And then I found out Vanessa had called my friends while I was unconscious, telling them not to worry because I loved the attention. She had told them I staged things like this before. My stomach clenched with rage and humiliation. When I confronted her later, she shrugged and said, "You cannot be mad." I was just joking. People know you like drama. I wanted to scream, but the years of conditioning held me silent. She was poisoning my reputation from miles away. Each visit home was worse. She had no job but always had an excuse. She would lounge in the living room with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, sighing dramatically whenever my parents asked about applications. I would watch her manipulate them and feel my chest tighten. She even began to use phrases I had said to doctors, parroting them with uncanny accuracy. The dizziness between meals, the trembling at night, the headaches that came suddenly. She was weaving my reality into her fiction until sometimes I felt like I was losing my grip on what belonged to me. The hidden hatred in her eyes grew sharper each time I succeeded. When I landed a competitive internship at a hospital, she refused to congratulate me. Instead, she muttered that it must be nice to play the martyr and get rewarded for it. I caught her once rifling through my backpack while I showered. My glucose meter was in her hand when I walked in. She smiled and said she just wanted to see how it worked. That smile sent a chill down my spine. She was not curious. She was collecting ammunition. One evening after a family dinner, when I excused myself to give an insulin shot, I overheard her telling our cousin that I did it for sympathy, that I exaggerated how sick I was so people would treat me like glass. I leaned against the bathroom wall, tears blurring my eyes, because even after years of enduring, I still hoped she might protect me instead of destroy me. But hope was wasted on Vanessa. She thrived on watching me crumble. My parents continued to walk the tightrope of denial. They saw her tantrums and her endless lies, but whenever I begged them to acknowledge the danger, they told me she was just jealous, just insecure, just struggling. Endure it, Rachel. She is your sister. She loves you deep down. Those words echoed like a curse. They trapped me in silence, convinced me that my suffering was less important than the illusion of family harmony. By the time I graduated, I carried not only a diploma, but a deep weariness in my bones. I had achieved independence on paper, but emotionally, I was still shackled to her resentment. Vanessa's hatred was no longer hidden to me, but it remained hidden to most of the world. She smiled for neighbors, charmed distant relatives played the role of misunderstood daughter. I saw the cracks, the venom behind her eyes, but no one else wanted to look. I told myself that adulthood meant I could distance myself, build a life free from her poison, but the truth was that she was always waiting. She carried my illness like a script she had memorized. She carried my weaknesses like weapons in her pocket. And deep inside me, I feared the day she would stop pretending and finally act on the hatred that had been growing unchecked since childhood. That fear whispered to me in hospital corridors and quiet nights at my apartment, even in the middle of laughter with friends. It was the knowledge that my sister was not just jealous, she was dangerous, and one day she would prove it. The year everything began to unravel was the year of Thanksgiving when I was 22. I had been working long shifts as part of my nursing program and was already exhausted, but I was looking forward to seeing family sharing food and feeling a little normal for once. Our house smelled of roasted turkey cinnamon pies and sweet potatoes. Relatives filled the rooms laughing, drinking, and asking about my studies. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax, thinking maybe the holiday would pass without incident. Vanessa arrived late, sweeping in with the air of a queen returning to her court. She wore a dramatic scarf and carried a small bag of candies, claiming she needed them for her blood sugar. My stomach tightened the moment she said it. She had been performing her fake illness for years, but this time she seemed determined to escalate it in front of everyone. We sat around the dining table, candles flickering, plates piled high. I was cutting into my food, carefully counting carbs in my head, when Vanessa suddenly dropped her fork and clutched her chest. Her eyes rolled back slightly, her hands shook, and she whispered that she felt faint. The entire table erupted in concern. My aunt leaned forward. My uncle stood to grab water. My mother gasped. Vanessa groaned loudly, collapsing against her chair like she was on stage. Everyone turned to her, ignoring the food cooling on their plates. I tried to intervene, saying that if she really thought she had low blood sugar, someone should test her. My aunt, a registered nurse, immediately reached for her glucose meter. Vanessa hesitated, then offered her finger with a dramatic sigh. We all watched the tiny drop of blood, and then the machine beeped. 95. Perfectly normal. Silence fell over the room. Vanessa's eyes darted nervously. My aunt frowned. "That cannot be a low," she said firmly. "You are fine." Vanessa stammered, claiming the machine must be wrong, that it had malfunctioned, that she had eaten too much sugar earlier. But the doubt was already spreading. Our cousin whispered that she had seen Vanessa sneaking candy in her room earlier that day. The pieces began to fall into place for everyone except Vanessa. My father looked stricken, my mother confused. For the first time, their denial cracked. Later that evening, while relatives lingered in the living room, my parents went into Vanessa's room. I was not supposed to know what they found, but I overheard the whispers, the sharp intake of breath, the angry voices. They discovered her diary hidden beneath clothes in the closet, pages and pages of detailed notes about how to mimic diabetes. She had recorded symptoms, timing, even strategies for convincing others. She had practiced everything down to the way my voice sounded when I was weak. The betrayal was undeniable now. When my parents confronted her, she screamed that it was unfair that I always got the attention, that she was invisible. Her words tumbled out like knives. "You love her more. You only care about her sickness. I could die tomorrow and you would not notice." My father's face was pale with shock. My mother's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, they did not defend her. They told her she had gone too far, that pretending to have a life-threatening disease was beyond jealousy, it was cruelty. Vanessa's response was to throw a lamp across the room, shattering it against the wall. She shouted that they were choosing their defective daughter over their healthy one. I listened from the hallway, trembling, because part of me was relieved they finally saw her lies, but another part was terrified of what she might do now that she had been exposed. That night, the house was filled with tension thick enough to choke on. Relatives left early, muttering uneasily. My mother sat in the kitchen with her head in her hands. My father paced back and forth, silent and grim. Vanessa locked herself in her room, blasting music to drown out the world. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was dread, because I knew Vanessa. Being confronted would not stop her. It would only fuel her anger, and anger in Vanessa was dangerous. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She floated into the kitchen, hair perfectly brushed, smiling sweetly, offering to help make breakfast. but the look in her eyes when she glanced at me was pure venom. It said without words that she blamed me for everything, that she would not forget this humiliation, that she would get even. I spent the rest of that weekend walking on eggshells waiting for the explosion. My parents avoided confrontation as though hoping silence would calm her. But silence never calmed Vanessa. It gave her room to plan. When I returned to my apartment after the holiday, I could not shake the memory of her smile sharp and cold or the weight of her diary in my father's hands. For years, I had carried the burden of her lies alone. Now everyone knew, but instead of feeling free, I felt more trapped than ever. Because if she was willing to fake illness and record her strategies, what would she be willing to do next? Thanksgiving was supposed to be a celebration of gratitude. Instead, it became the night my family finally saw the truth, and the night I realized that exposure would not stop my sister. It would push her towards something darker. She had lost her cover, lost the easy sympathy of relatives, lost the illusion she had built. People were watching her more closely now, and that meant the next act of her performance would have to be more convincing, more extreme, more dangerous. I left that house knowing something was coming, something worse than all the years of lies and stolen attention. I could feel it in my bones like the heaviness of a storm rolling in. And I was right. The storm was just beginning. The breaking point arrived on a cold December night when I returned home after a long shift at the hospital. Snow clung to my coat, and my breath misted in the air as I unlocked the front door. The house was quiet eerily, so the kind of silence that made my skin prickle. I set my bag down, walked into the kitchen, and froze. The counter where I kept my insulin supplies was empty. Every vial, every pen, every emergency glucagon kit was gone. Panic flared instantly, my heart racing as I tore open drawers, checked the refrigerator, even ran upstairs to my bedroom where I kept a backup supply under the floorboard. It was all gone. My chest tightened as realization dawned. Vanessa. She was standing in the kitchen when I returned, leaning casually against the counter with a knife in one hand and a small box in the other. Inside the box were the last few vials of insulin, my lifeline. She tilted it so I could see the glass glinting under the light. "If I can't be sick, then you can't either," she said, her voice disturbingly calm. "Let's see how long you last without it." My throat closed up not just from fear, but from the rising dryness that was already signaling my blood sugar was climbing. I had given myself my last dose hours earlier before leaving work. Without another shot soon, the numbers would begin to spike dangerously. I whispered her name, begging, but she only smiled and lifted one vial between her fingers. She dropped it on the tile. The glass shattered insulin spreading across the floor like spilled blood. I gasped, every nerve screaming, but she only stepped closer. "You always thought you were special," she sneered. "But what happens when the special one loses her crutch? Who are you then?" "Rachel." "Nothing, just another girl waiting to die." I backed toward the wall, my hands trembling. The knife glinted as she toyed with it, not in a way that suggested she would stab me, but in a way that threatened destruction of the rest of the vials. My body already felt heavy, my head buzzing with the faint fog of hyperglycemia. I knew exactly what was happening inside me. My blood was thickening, my cells starving for energy, my organs straining. I swallowed hard, but my mouth was dry, my tongue sticking to the roof. Vanessa watched me with fascination. 400, maybe higher by now, she mused. "How long until your organs start shutting down?" I read about that. Your heart, your kidneys, your brain. Imagine watching it happen. I forced myself to stay upright, gripping the edge of the counter. "You don't have to do this," I rasped. "This isn't you." She laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. "Oh, this is exactly me. You took everything from me, every hug, every worried look from Mom, every late-night trip to the hospital where they sat by your bed. You think I didn't notice? You think I didn't feel invisible? I wanted to scream that I never asked for any of it, that I hated being sick, that I wished I could give it all back if it meant saving my body from this torment. But the words tangled in my throat." She lifted another vial, twirling it like a toy. "I could end this right now," she said. "I could pour them all down the drain and watch you crumble. Or maybe you could do something for me." My stomach knotted. "What do you want?" Her eyes glinted with triumph. "I want you to tell Mom and Dad that you helped me fake, that you coached me, taught me, showed me how. You will admit it was your idea. If you do that, maybe I will let you live." My chest heaved, breaths shallow. I knew what she was asking was impossible. If I agreed, if I confessed to such a lie, my parents would never trust me again. Every emergency, every symptom would be doubted. I would lose everything. But if I refused, she would destroy the last of my insulin, and I would slip into ketoacidosis before dawn. The room tilted slightly as nausea surged through me. I pressed a hand against my stomach, trying to steady myself. Vanessa grinned, delighted. "It's starting, isn't it? The nausea, the thirst, the heat in your skin. I know exactly what's happening inside you. You can't hide it." I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. The landline phone sat on the counter just a few feet away, but reaching it meant lunging past her and the knife. My phone was upstairs and might as well have been on the moon. She saw me glance toward the doorway and raised the knife, pressing it against the cardboard box holding the vials. "Don't even think about it," she warned. "One step and I puncture them all." My vision blurred for a second, dark spots dancing at the edges. I closed my eyes and forced them open again, fighting to stay present. "You know what the funny part is?" she asked, almost conversational. "I actually learned so much about diabetes from you. I know exactly what your body is doing right now. Your liver is dumping sugar, your blood is turning to acid, your muscles are wasting." She said it with fascination, as if she were a scientist observing an experiment instead of a sister watching her sibling die. The metallic taste of rising ketones coated my mouth. I was slipping fast. My hands shook uncontrollably, not from fear, but from chemical chaos. Vanessa crouched in front of me, her face inches from mine. "I want to see you beg, Rachel. I want to see you realize that I hold your life in my hands." My heart thudded painfully in my chest, my body screaming for relief. I met her gaze, forcing words past cracked lips. "If I die here, everyone will know. They will know it was you." She tilted her head, smiling coldly. "Not if you confess first. Not if you admit it was your game. Then I will be the one who tried to save you. I will be the hero." The world tilted again, and I almost collapsed. I caught the counternails digging into the laminate tears, burning my eyes. My body was betraying me, shutting down piece by piece. Vanessa stood knife-poised box in her other hand, her power absolute. That was the breaking point. I knew then that this was not just jealousy anymore. It was malice stripped bare. She was no longer pretending to be sick. She was making me sick. She was making me die, and she was enjoying every second. I could feel my body beginning to collapse under the weight of what Vanessa was doing to me. The heaviness in my chest, the way my breaths came shallow and rapid, the searing thirst clawing at my throat. It was all part of the cruel reality of diabetic ketoacidosis. She stood there with the knife and the box of insulin like a queen presiding over my suffering. My knees buckled and I slid down against the cabinet, but she stepped closer and nudged me with her foot, demanding I stay upright. "You are not passing out yet," she snapped. "Not until you give me what I want." She pulled her phone from her pocket, turned on the camera, and propped it against the counter. The red recording light blinked like a countdown to my humiliation. "Say it, Rachel," she ordered, her voice sharp. "Tell the camera you taught me to fake. Tell them you wanted the attention so badly you showed me how." My throat was so dry that words rasped painfully, but I managed to croak out, "No." Her eyes narrowed, fury flashing. She lifted the knife and tapped the box. "One word, Rachel. Just one confession, and you get to live." I swallowed against the dryness, my head pounding. The room tilted, and I gagged bile rising with nothing in my stomach to bring up. She stepped back, wrinkling her nose in disgust, then moved closer again, thrusting the phone into my line of sight. "Do it, or I destroy the rest." My hands shook as I tried to steady myself. My mind raced through possibilities, but every escape route ended with her slashing open the vials or throwing them down the drain. The only thing I had left was time, and even that was slipping through my fingers. Then, fate sent a spark of hope. A knock rattled the front door, followed by the deep voice of our neighbor, Mr. Miller. "Hey, everything okay in there?" I thought I heard something. My heart leapt. Mr. Miller was 65, a retired cop who lived alone next door. He had the sharp instincts of someone who had seen too much in his career. Vanessa stiffened, then quickly plastered on a smile. She grabbed my arm, yanking me upright, and hissed into my ear. "Make one wrong sound and it is over," she shouted toward the door. "Everything's fine, Mr. Miller, thanks. Just dropped a glass in the kitchen." "No big deal." My vision blurred, but I forced myself to think. If I stayed silent, he might walk away, but if I made noise, Vanessa might destroy the insulin. I looked around desperately for something, anything. My hand brushed against the edge of a water glass on the counter. With the last of my strength, I knocked it to the floor. The crash echoed through the house. Mr. Miller's voice grew sharper. "Rachel, you in there?" "You okay?" Vanessa cursed under her breath, gripping my arm so tightly it bruised. She shouted again. "We're fine. Just leave us alone." But her voice trembled, and I knew Mr. Miller had noticed. I heard him mutter something, then footsteps moving quickly across the porch. He was not leaving. Hope flickered faintly in my chest, though nausea swelled stronger, my stomach twisting painfully. Vanessa's eyes darted to the door, then back at me. "You think he can save you?" she hissed. "He can't. Not before I finish this." She lifted another vial from the box and held it above the sink. My stomach clenched as I watched her fingers relax slightly, teasing the drop. My body screamed for the insulin, my cells crying out for relief. She smirked, watching me sway, and whispered, "One more down unless you start talking." The phone camera blinked at me, recording every second of my suffering. She wanted evidence leverage to use later to rewrite the narrative and make me the villain. My lips parted, words forming, but before I could speak, another knock thundered against the door. Mr. Miller's voice was sharper now. "Rachel, if you don't answer me, I'm calling 911. Vanessa's mask slipped. Panic flared in her eyes. She grabbed me by the shoulders and hissed, "You will tell him you are fine. Do you hear me? You will tell him, or I swear you won't see morning." She yanked me toward the door, the knife pressed against the box of insulin like a hostage negotiator's weapon. She cracked the door open just enough to show her face. "Sorry, Mr. Miller," she said with forced cheer. "Rachel is just resting. She is tired from work." But I saw Mr. Miller's eyes peer past her. He caught sight of me in the hallway, pale, sweating, hunched against the wall. His gaze sharpened instantly. "Rachel, you okay?" he asked directly. Vanessa blocked the doorway. Her body tense, but her hand on my arm slipped for just a moment as she tried to hold the door half closed. That was all I needed. I stumbled forward, knocking into the side table, sending a lamp crashing to the floor. Mr. Miller's eyes widened, his instincts firing. He stepped forward, but Vanessa shoved the door closed with a slam. Lock clicked. Her breathing was ragged, her mask gone now. She turned on me, fury etched in every line of her face. "You think he can save you?" she screamed. "You think anyone can?" "You are mine, Rachel." Her words echoed through the house, venomous and loud. I collapsed to the floor, my body shaking with exhaustion, but a flicker of determination remained. Mr. Miller had seen me. He knew something was wrong. He would not walk away now. Vanessa paced the kitchen, her hands trembling as she clutched the knife and the box. The sirens had not come yet, but I could almost hear them in the distance, a phantom sound of hope. My body was weakening, sliding closer to unconsciousness, but my mind clung to one truth. I was not alone anymore. Someone outside knew, and that knowledge was enough to keep me alive at least for a little longer as the survival game reached its cruel peak. The minutes after Mr. Miller left the porch stretched like hours, every second marked by the rasp of my breath and the furious pacing of Vanessa. She clutched the knife and the box of insulin as if they were extensions of her body, her eyes darting to the window where the curtains twitched with the movement of our neighbor retreating across the yard. I could see the panic warring with her rage. She knew he had seen me, knew his instincts would not let it go. Yet she also knew she still held the power inside this house and she wanted to use it. She turned on me suddenly, her eyes blazing. If he calls anyone, you better hope you've confessed before they get here, she snarled. Otherwise, you'll be lying on the floor and no one will believe a word you say. She yanked another vial from the box, held it high above the sink, and let it drop. The glass shattered insulin splashing against porcelain and tile. My cry caught in my throat, not just for myself, but for the knowledge that one more chance at survival had just vanished. My blood sugar was soaring, nausea twisting into violent cramps. My skin felt feverish and dry, my tongue thick like cotton. I could almost feel the acid rising in my blood, burning me from within. Vanessa leaned close, her breath hot and sharp with fury. "You're not even fighting," she hissed. "That's what makes you pathetic. You spent your whole life letting everyone coddle you, and now when it really matters, you just collapse." I forced my lips to move, voice cracked and weak. "If I die, you'll never get away with it." Her laugh was jagged. "You think anyone will believe you? I have your confession on camera. I have proof." My head spun. I remembered the blinking red light of her phone still propped on the counter, capturing every moment she demanded lies from me. But even if the video showed her threats, she believed she could twist it into her story. My vision blurred, darkness crowding at the edges, and I thought I might slip away right there. Then I heard it, the faint but unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance. My heart lurched. Mr. Miller must have called 911. Vanessa's head whipped toward the window, her body tense. She cursed under her breath, then spun on me, panic finally breaking through her composure. "You told him, didn't you?" she screamed. "You made him suspicious." Her fury boiled over. She hurled the knife onto the counter and grabbed another vial, slamming it against the edge until it cracked precious drops, spilling onto her hands. She raised it again, ready to smash it completely when the sirens grew louder closer. Red and blue lights flickered faintly through the curtains. For the first time, Vanessa faltered. Her breath came fast, her hand shaking. She looked at me crumpled on the floor, then at the door, then at the box still holding the last vials. She realized she was running out of time. She shoved me back against the cabinets, teeth clenched. "Fine. You want to play this game? Let's see if you can survive with just one." She hurled 2 more vials into the sink glass, shattering like gunshots. Only one remained in the box. She clutched it tightly, holding it above her head as though deciding whether to destroy it or keep it as leverage. My body screamed for that last chance. My breaths were shallow, my stomach twisted, my head a haze of confusion. But deep in my pocket, pressed against my hip, I felt the small bulge of something I had hidden earlier. During one of her rants, she had left a half-used syringe on the counter, a remnant from when she had pretended to draw insulin for a performance. I had managed to slip it into my pocket while she was distracted with the door. There was just a sliver left in it, but enough to buy me minutes. I forced my trembling hands to pull it out, hidden from her sight. Vanessa's eyes were still on the window, panic growing as the siren swelled louder. Then the pounding of fists rattled the front door. "Police, open up!" The command echoed through the house. Vanessa's face twisted desperation and fury mingling. She looked at me one last time, her lips curling into a vicious smile. "If I go down, you go down with me." She hurled the last vial toward the disposal and lunged for the back door. At the same instant, I jammed the needle into my thigh, pressing the plunger with shaking fingers. Cold relief seeped into my bloodstream, a fragile thread of hope amid the chaos. The vial shattered against the sink glass and insulin spraying everywhere, but it no longer mattered. I had saved myself with the hidden syringe. My body would not collapse, not yet. The back door banged open as police stormed in, guns-drawn flashlights cutting through the dim light. "Freeze," they shouted. Vanessa spun her hands up her face pale as the knife clattered uselessly onto the floor. For a heartbeat, the room froze, all sound drowned by the thunder of my pulse. Then officers surged forward, pinning her arms, snapping cuffs onto her wrists as she screamed. She tried to twist the story, shouting that I had destroyed the insulin myself, that I was sick and lying, but the scene around her betrayed the truth. Broken glass everywhere, residue of insulin staining the floor. The recording phone still blinking red with her threats captured in its memory. An officer knelt beside me, checking my pulse, calling urgently for the paramedics already rushing in behind them. My parents burst through the front door seconds later, pale with shock, their eyes wide at the sight of me on the floor and Vanessa struggling in handcuffs. My mother's scream echoed in the air, my father's face ashen with horror. But all I could focus on was the taste of metal in my mouth, the rush of shallow air in my lungs, and the faint coolness of that last desperate shot of insulin working its way through me. I was alive and Vanessa was finally trapped. The climax had come. She had tried to kill me, had smiled while she said she wanted to watch me die slowly. But now it was she who trembled, she who screamed as the officers dragged her toward the door. The sirens outside wailed louder, drowning out her shrieks as if the whole night were ending in a crescendo of justice. I closed my eyes for a moment, not in surrender, but in relief. The nightmare had reached its peak, and for the first time I believed it might finally be ending. The chaos of that night blurred into fragments of memory. I remember the flash of red and blue lights bouncing off the walls, the weight of gloved hands lifting me onto a stretcher, the sharp sting of IV lines being pushed into my arm. The voices of paramedics layered over one another, rapid and efficient, calling out blood sugar levels, vitals, orders for fluids and insulin. My body shook violently from dehydration and acidosis, but I clung to consciousness because I needed to see it. I needed to see my sister taken away. Through half-closed eyes, I saw Vanessa thrashing against the officers, screaming that she had done nothing wrong, her voice breaking with desperation as they dragged her toward the patrol car. She tried to twist her wrists free, shouting that she was the victim that I had framed her. But the officers were unmoved. The evidence was everywhere, the shattered glass on the floor, the knife with her fingerprints, the recording on her phone that showed her threatening me. For once, her performance could not save her. My parents stood frozen in the doorway, their faces etched with disbelief. My mother was crying, hands clutched against her chest, while my father's jaw was clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. They looked from me to Vanessa and back again, the weight of years of denial crashing down on them. I wanted to say something to reassure them or to scream at them for never listening, but my throat was too raw, my body too weak. All I could manage was to lock eyes with my father and hold his gaze until he finally nodded as if silently admitting the truth he had ignored for so long. At the hospital, they stabilized me, pumping fluids and insulin monitoring every number on the machines beside my bed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, nurses moved in and out, and I drifted in and out of awareness. When I fully woke, my parents were seated at my bedside. My mother's eyes were swollen from crying, her face pale with exhaustion. My father sat rigid in the chair, hands clasped, staring at the floor. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then he whispered, "I should have protected you." The words cracked something in me. Years of swallowed pain rose in my chest, but I was too tired to release them. I only nodded, letting him hold my hand for the first time in what felt like years. Days passed, and then came the trial. Vanessa was charged with reckless endangerment, destruction of medical property, and attempted murder. The courtroom was crowded, the air thick with tension. I sat at the witness stand, hands trembling, telling the jury what she had done. My voice shook as I described the way she dropped the vials one by one, the way she whispered that she wanted to watch me die slowly, the way she laughed while my body shut down. Every detail felt like ripping open a wound, but I forced myself to keep going because the truth needed to be heard. The prosecutor played the video from her phone, and the sound of her voice filled the room. "Die slowly, I want to watch." The jury shifted uneasily, some of them visibly recoiling. My parents sat behind me, tears streaming down my mother's face, my father's fists clenched on his knees. Vanessa sat at the defense table, her beauty stripped of its charm, her eyes swollen from crying. She avoided my gaze, staring down at the table as the weight of her own words condemned her. When the verdict was read, I felt the world go still. Guilty on all counts. My sister broke into sobs, her body shaking, her voice cracking as she begged the judge for mercy. But mercy was no longer hers to demand. The judge's words rang in my ears, clear and final. Sentenced to years in prison, taken away in handcuffs, she looked back once her eyes filled with something unreadable. Hatred, fear, regret. I could not tell. For me, it did not matter. She was gone. Justice had arrived not in the form of vengeance, but in the quiet certainty that she could no longer hurt me. My parents wept openly in the courtroom, their grief tangled with guilt. But for me, there was no grief left, only exhaustion and the faint relief of knowing the nightmare was over. As I walked out of the courthouse into the cold air, reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt free. The silence after the trial felt heavier than the chaos that had come before it. My body was slowly recovering, but my mind carried wounds far deeper than anything insulin or IV fluids could heal. I stayed in the hospital for several more days, the steady beep of monitors becoming the soundtrack to my new reality. Nurses checked my vitals with gentle hands, doctors adjusted my regimen, and social workers slipped pamphlets about trauma counseling onto the tray beside my bed. My parents visited every day, sitting quietly as though words might shatter what fragile peace remained. My mother often cried silently, her shoulders shaking, while my father sat stiffly, his eyes always on me as if watching to make sure I did not disappear before his eyes. When I was finally discharged home, did not feel like home. The kitchen had been scrubbed, glass-swept counters polished, but I could still see the ghost of what had happened there. I could picture Vanessa's hand dangling vials above the sink, the red glow of her recording phone, the knife gleaming in her grip. I avoided that room as much as I could, eating takeout in the living room, trying to pretend normalcy. My parents suggested counseling, and for once, I agreed. I sat in an office with warm yellow walls and a woman who asked me to describe the night again and again until the words no longer tore me apart. She spoke about PTSD, about how trauma lives in the body as much as the mind. She gave me breathing exercises, grounding techniques, tools to fight the nightmares that came each night when I closed my eyes and heard my sister's voice whisper, "Die slowly. I want to watch." Sleep was broken and fitful. I woke gasping, checking my insulin pump obsessively, sometimes pricking my finger in the dark just to reassure myself. My parents tried to help in small ways. My father installed locks on the cabinet where my supplies were stored. My mother cooked special meals after hours of research, but what I needed most was time. Time to believe I was safe. Time to accept that my sister was no longer hovering like a shadow at the edge of my life. Mr. Miller became a regular presence, bringing groceries, checking in with his calm, ex-cop authority. He never pried, never asked more than I was ready to give, but his presence itself was a reminder that not everyone turned away when danger knocked. He had seen me, he had believed me, and he had acted. For that, I would always be grateful. Slowly, life began to stitch itself back together. I returned to my nursing program, though. I carried scars into every hospital corridor. I found myself watching patients' families, carefully noticing dynamics, seeing echoes of my own story in the way some relatives hovered while others ignored. My empathy deepened, but so did my resolve. I would not let my sister's cruelty define me as a victim forever. I would transform it into strength. At family counseling sessions, my parents spoke haltingly about their years of denial about how they had excused Vanessa's cruelty as jealousy about how they had failed to protect me. My anger surged in those rooms, raw and unfiltered, but slowly I found a way to voice it. I told them I needed them to stop saying she loved me deep down. I needed them to stop pretending her actions came from anything but malice. I needed them to accept that some wounds are deliberate, not accidental. They listened finally, and though it did not erase the past, it began to build a fragile bridge toward trust. Months passed, and then the day came when I returned to court, not as a victim, but as a witness to sentencing. Vanessa stood before the judge, her once perfect hair limp, her beauty dulled by weeks in custody. She wept openly as the sentence was handed down: years in prison, mandatory psychiatric evaluation, no contact orders. She glanced at me once, eyes red and swollen, but I felt nothing. No pity, no hate, just a hollow distance. She had chosen this path, and now she would walk it alone. Walking out of the courtroom, I breathed deeply of the cold winter air, feeling lighter than I had in years. Healing was not a straight line. Some days I still woke, shaking. Some days I still heard her laugh in my head. But slowly, the waves grew less violent. Slowly, hope returned. I began speaking at local support groups for diabetics, sharing my story, not as a tale of suffering, but as a testament to survival. I told others to lock away their supplies, to trust their instincts, to never let anyone weaponize their illness. Each time I spoke, the weight in my chest loosened. I was no longer just Rachel Dawson, the sister nearly killed by jealousy. I was Rachel Dawson, survivor nurse advocate. One evening, months later, I sat on the porch with my father as the sun sank low. He handed me a small box, a lockbox he had bought for my insulin. His voice was rough when he said, "I can't change the past, Rachel, but I can promise I'll never doubt you again." I held the box in my lap, the metal cool against my skin, and for the first time, I believed him. Life would never return to what it was before. But maybe, just maybe, it could be something better.